Hello. Today I'm going to speedrun a summary of my Future of World of Warcraft video series that has 6 parts and lasts about 2 hours. And since most people don't have 2 hours to watch some videos, you'll get this summary. The goal of this video is to suggest a sustainable game release cycle for Blizzard going forward and different quality of life changes and general changes to these modes that will bring the game to a more modern player base. These different game modes are Retail, Classic, and Classic Plus. But first, I will talk about the facts that I see. The first being that current Blizzard, I don't believe, is capable of making a new good game and/or new good systems, as this should be fairly obvious if you look at Retail over the past 5 years, as Retail has crittered to the ground with the lowest player base ever. Given this fact, all the changes that I will suggest for Classic and Classic Plus will not be making new content, it'll just be adjusting current content. And then hopefully, once the game starts to grow in population, thus increasing Blizzard's profitability, only then will Blizzard be able to hire new competent developers to make new content. The next fact I see is that the player base wants different things and has an extremely wide skill level, thus to match the current player base, which should be attracting a bunch of young people in their 20s or teens with the current player base, at least in Classic and Classic Plus, which is an aging population of high 30-year-olds, I believe there should be a fairly distinct difference in systems and/or difficulty for these game modes. The first mode of the game being Retail, which will continue to have a 2-year cycle, and Classic and Classic Plus being a 3-year cycle that mirror each other on expansion releases. Additionally, I will add one more game mode, which is a wildcard, where Blizzard could create private servers for specific populations of people. How this would work is a group of people would get together a bunch of money to purchase a set period of time for a specific server in which they could make their own rules for. An example being that Asmongold could get 10,000 people to purchase a 1-year Wrath server, and the changes they could make is that they could adjust the raid bosses to their liking, making them harder or easier. And in addition to this, Asmongold and other server leaders could have GM powers in which they could teleport anywhere, kill anything, or spawn random bosses around the world. This would enable lots of world PvP events or PvE events, but since this is a sand mode version of the game, the options are endless if the Blizzard technology is there. Here are the goals of the changes that I will be getting to in the next few slides. The main point being that player progression should be moved to their account versus specific characters, since these 3-year cycles will be reset and players might be adverse to starting fresh. In addition to this, lots of quality of life changes are needed to take the frustrating points out of the game, improving the leveling experience so that leveling is more than just pulling a mob every 30 seconds and then drinking for 30 seconds, especially at low levels, making the world feel more alive with multiple changes, adding consistency to player systems across all 3 classic expansions so that the game is more fluid, and improvements to these systems can be made more easily, but all these changes for the Classic and Classic Plus should be made in the spirit of original Classic WoW, i.e. no LFR, and/or equivalent, everyone gets a participation ribbon. Here is the content release schedule for Classic Plus. In the pursuit of consistency, each expansion should last 1 year and should be split into 4 different phases. All raids should be 20-man so that new boss changes can be tuned more accurately, and since in the modern age, getting a 40-man raid together where everyone has at least close to similar skill level is extremely frustrating. All these raids will only have 1 difficulty, and all raids will have a weekly lockout. In addition, for dungeons, since dungeons are pretty much worthless outside of Phase 1 for all these expansions, I would add a mythic difficulty and release them each phase so that people have additional content to do, and this would be somewhat in the spirit of Mythic Plus, as I believe the modern game has found that having hard 5-man dungeons that you do with your friends or guildies can be extremely fun. Next comes the changes that I suggest. Many of these changes are made to make raiding and parsing more competitive and consistent versus the current system in which whoever has the most raid buffs does the most DPS. Also, getting rid of weird items and/or interactions that snapshot your DPS that aren't originally intended. Other changes are making raids more enjoyable by having teleporters and graveyards for each raid, making tanks scale smoother in the early game, and making buffing the raid less time consuming. The next slide starts by adding consistency to the game by having paladins and shamans playable for all 3 expansions for both factions, adding dual spec, making dot classes more viable with stat changes, adding the ICC buff to every raid to complement the harder difficulty for all bosses, but making it easy enough so that a vast majority of guilds full clear the content during the phase, even if they are a below average guild. Also, just adding a lot of Wrath of the Lich King quality of life changes to all 3 expansions. The next slide, I suggest raids dropping more loot, again because of the faster schedule, removing flying mounts from the game to encourage world PvP along with other PvP changes, banning external add-ons, but having a list of important add-ons available in an official Blizzard library, and a revamp of the achievement system, where achievements are actually an achievement instead of just boring grind fests. Now for the Classic Plus only changes, where bigger changes can happen, since we aren't as worried about completely matching the Classic field. Changes include massively altering the rotation and strength of classes from expansion to expansion so that one class doesn't stay the strongest for multiple years, and also so that their rotations are completely different expansion to expansion to promote new spells and playstyles. Another change to gearing is tier bonuses should be changed regularly, again to promote different spells and playstyles, along with gear eye level scaling being slower so that people don't feel compelled to get full BIS every single phase, since each phase only lasts 12 weeks. Also, the attunement process should be somewhat similar to the TBC system across all expansions. In the last slide of changes, I suggest multiple changes to leveling so that leveling is closer to a modern MMO feel instead of feeling 15 years old, where you only have a few spells at lower levels and mobs just auto-attack you, resulting in no dynamic gameplay. I also would reduce the time it takes to level due to the faster release schedule. I would also change a lot of items in the game that are currently unusable since they are terribly statted. I would also add war mode along with other features to make the open world be more lively and more fun. I would add legendaries to each raid, but also require people to complete a Mage Shower event, which is very difficult, to be able to equip these legendaries, and this should enable no noobs to be able to equip a legendaries, as I believe legendaries should be only achievable by some of the best gamers, i.e. the top 10%, thus resulting in the bottom 90% trying to improve themselves to be able to equip these legendaries. On the topic of boss changes, I would suggest Blizzard make it so that some bosses are hard for certain roles. This is so that, for example, tanks are tested throughout the entire expansion and not just final phases. Having healer, tank, and DPS checks for each raid will promote people improving themselves throughout the game and also gives guilds a reason to change their rosters so that they don't hit a brick wall in the future. Lastly, I think there should be way more pure DPS fights like Patchwork or Gruul, since pure DPS fights are just in general very fun. Here is the average TBC Plus timeline I think would happen if the changes that I suggest are implemented, basically with adding new dungeons, legendaries, and high quality items to previous raids. People will be able to play more since there will be more stuff to do. Thus, people shouldn't be just raid logging once they complete the current phase raid, which is how the current gameplay is like. All in all, I would estimate these changes will double the amount of relative current content people can do on a weekly basis, but gearing will be extremely fast due to multiple factors, which should lead to a very fun and lively parsing scene and/or speedrunning scene. But for the more casual players, they should still be able to clear all the new content due to these increased drop changes and the ICC buff. I won't be talking about retail changes in this video. If you want to see my retail video, go into the description and click it. And the last change I'll suggest is monetization changes. I think that if we expect a high quality product, we should be paying a high quality price. Thus, subs should cost $20 per month and only be monthly. The reason for this is because I believe this holds Blizzard accountable to keep the game in a good state, since if they mess up, you can unsub and you're not stuck in a long contract. And since we are paying a higher sub fee, I would get rid of paid boost, WoW token, store pets and mounts, and the ability to transfer to full servers. Lastly, I would add premium subs to get MTX for spell effects. The reason for this is because Blizzard is a business, and they are there to make money, and some people in the real world have extra money to spend. Thus, premium subs should be offered. How it would work is there would be a library of MTX spells, and you could pick 1 or 3 depending on the premium sub that you pick. So a Fire Mage could buy the super premium sub and maybe get a Dragon MTX Fireball, a Volcano Flame Strike, and or a Fire Explosion Blink MTX. I believe this would be good value for the consumer since they use these spells on a regular basis. Thus, in my opinion, this is way more valuable than having a pet or a mount in which you only see on screen around 10% of the time when you're moving around the world. And for those saying $20 a month is too much, here I list how cheap gaming actually is, with me playing WoW for roughly 350 days /played and paying less than 20 cents per hour. This compares to other free-to-play games like League of Legends or Path of Exile, in which I've played a lot, but in general have paid equivalent to World of Warcraft through MTX purchases. And an even bigger comparison is that if you compare this gaming experience with an equivalent entertainment experience of renting movies on a per hour basis is 8 times more expensive, thus I wouldn't cry about paying $20 a month. Now that is the end of my changes summary. If you want to see me talk about the changes in detail, go into the description and click on the video you want to watch. Hopefully Blizzard makes big changes to the game instead of continually bleeding subs, as it has been for the past 12 years. But I'm not holding my breath. If you have any comments, add a comment, and I'll get to them. Thanks.